in New Zealand. But wherever you are around the world, we're happy to host you here at our learning lab, our first learning lab from SheEO. And we're so excited to be launching this with all of you here today. We understand there's over 500 registered women involved in today's learning lab. And I'm broadcasting from Toronto, where our SheEO office is located. And our host and our guest today, Julie Barker-Merz, is in the Kitchener-Waterloo area of Ontario, so about an hour and a half from here. And we are excited to bring this to you today. So let's dive into what we have planned and how things are going to go. So this is going to be a conversation of owning your power and also of leadership capability and of growth. So it certainly is a great place to start having that conversation, because as you see in front of you, we have the credo for SheEO. And thought this was a very important place for us to start, because this is where the Learning Lab has emerged from. And a couple things about this. I approached Vicki with some ideas about learning and growth of the many women involved in this network. And she was very open to that. She had her own ideas. And I guess we really started to put the ingredients into the Learning Lab into full gear in January. So it was a pretty quick turnaround, and an April launch with sort of the renaissance of spring into summer, at least in this time zone, is something that speaks to our growth within SheEO and the many amazing women that we have in this network. So we are going to own our greatness today and talk about some of that as we amplify our voices to take from the credo and celebrate. And really the Learning Lab is a place to embolden each other. And we're going to talk about ways to do that, because although I'm the person here facilitating and moderating, really we are going to be featuring so many amazing women within our network and building them up. And some of you have already put your hand up to be a part of this. We welcome that. And we are excited to be able to feature more voices. And as the Learning Lab moves beyond this format, there'll be other ways for you to do that. So who am I? I am Marisha Charsky, and I have my company Velocity Partnership, which is 15 years old this spring. And the crux of my company is I help large organizations innovate and problem solve like an entrepreneur. And I get to do this work all over the world, but I am also an entrepreneur myself and a coach of many entrepreneurs. And I recently launched a new platform called Entrepreneurs Velocity. And that is going to be a space for entrepreneurs to take their business to the next level through an online community. And I'm excited to be doing that. And this is a picture of me at a volunteer event that I do every year here in Toronto called Bike for Tykes. And we raise money for the Sick Kids Hospital here in the city. And that little boy that I'm holding is one of the boys who's been affected by cancer at a very young age. And all the money we raise goes to that. And I've been a fitness instructor, and I have been very active and an athlete at times through my life. And that really influences my practice. And Julie will be speaking to some of her journey in that regard also, because that's one area that certainly we have talked a lot of the capacity and the capabilities of an athletic mindset in your approach to being a business leader. So we, though, have also a very important sponsor of our Learning Lab series, and that's True Shield Insurance. So we're going to also begin with a message from True Shield, which I'm going to play, and I hope you can hear this very well.
At True Shield Insurance, we're passionate about helping entrepreneurs manage the risks of running their business. So when SheEO approached us about helping out with their new Learning Lab initiative, how could we say no? We're very proud to be a part of providing online resources for entrepreneurial women who want to grow and succeed in business. Glad you can join us. All of us here at True Shield are super excited about being a part of the wonderful work that SheEO is doing.
Thank you to our sponsor, True Shield Insurance, for helping give us a very important financial contribution to make all of this possible and to bring this around the world to our many partners. So I like to talk about ways you need to contribute, even though you're sitting behind the screen and we can't see all of you out there, but we know you're there and we want you to be able to juice this learning lab. So you're going to pull it towards you. So there's a couple ways for you to do that. One is that you were given a link into a canvas that we call the Insights to Action Canvas. And while Julie and I are having this dialogue together, I really encourage you to actually type out or write in your insights and your ideas from the conversation we're having. And it may not be a complete linear connection to what we were talking about, but something that got that tweaked for you during our conversation. The other thing in this is that you actually turn that into something actionable. So if you're able to communicate and write down 2 important actions you need to take as a result of spending this 75 minutes with us, that's important because while this doesn't cost you anything, it is your time. So I like to call it a ROT or a return on your time. And getting into action from the inspiration garnered from this conversation is very important. The other thing I'd like you to do is open up your chat, which is located in your screen, and type in any questions that you might have about your learning lab. So I am going to open mine and put that in place. And for a moment, I'm just going to just show you how this works. And you should all receive that. Julie, did you get that?
I did.
Awesome. Good. Great. The other thing is, I know this is international, so as you type in your chat questions, of which I will try to get as many into Julie as possible, or your own reflection or insight, tell us where you're from or where you are today. We really want to hear that. Other ways for you to juice this learning lab is to get into our Slack space that will happen after this. And it will be specifically about this topic that Julie and I are talking about. And you will be able to take that learning forward and be able to apply it to yourself. In our next session, our next learning lab, which will be in May, it'll be a different topic and a different Slack channel for you to join and to be able to have conversations with each other, whatever you want to take and make that Slack space for you. That's what we want it to be. So I see lots of you saying hello, and I see someone up very early in Auckland. Hello, this is fantastic. And then at the end, we want your feedback. This is our first session. This is really our prototype. And in the spirit of human-centered design or design thinking, if you're familiar with that, we always like to prototype things before we say, this is it. This is just the way it's going to be. And your feedback will help us be able to do that. So please make sure you give us formal feedback through our questionnaire. And if you want to send questions or comments to me personally, whatever it is, we want to hear from you. So thank you. Just saw someone in there from India, Julie, which is just fantastic. So speaking of Julie, who is this Julie I keep referring to? Julie Barker-Merz is the Senior Vice President, Southwestern Ontario Division of BMO. Julie is a longtime employee of BMO, and it's really her leadership journey of becoming an executive by the time she was 40 inside of the bank. But the way she's built herself up in her communities, plural, because she's been in many in Canada, and her application beyond business skills is something that I have been a part of. I've seen Julie, and her entrepreneurship lens on how she's built her business and her businesses across the bank has been something that has made a tremendous impact both within the bank, but also the different stakeholders, collaborators, partners with BMO. And Julie was an early activator when SHEO first came to be, and has been a huge supporter of SHEO, and is just a trusted partner in the development and the holding up of women and leadership across North America and beyond. So Julie, we're going to start a little bit with you sharing more about your journey to, where we are here today in 2018. So I'm going to hand the mic over to you just to say a little bit more about yourself and give us a little bit more context about Julie Barker-Merz.
Okay, great. Thank you, Marisha, and good morning, good afternoon. I'm truly excited to be here today and to share what hopefully will be a little bit of wisdom that some of you can take away and learn from. I certainly love participating in these type of events so that I can personally get something out of it and learn as well. So a little bit about my background. So for those of you who don't know what BMO is, if you're calling from Australia, you may not know who we are. BMO is one of the top 5 banks in Canada. And so we are the longest standing institution in Canada. We had our 200th birthday last year, and something that we're certainly very proud of. And I do like to start with that because a lot of what I've learned over the years has happened through this company. I'm a BMO lifer. I bleed blue, as we say in the company. I've been with the company over 20 years, and I started out of school just needing a job to pay off my student loans. I was a poli-sci criminology major, had no intention of going to anything to do with finance. And one thing led to the other. I ended up as a teller in Ottawa, our nation's capital. And from there, ended up throughout the company. And I've worked moved to Toronto soon after I started with the bank. And I've been in branches, I've been in call centers, I've been in headquarters and strategy and marketing and brokerage and mutual funds, wealth management, online brokerage, the retail side, the commercial side, you name it, I've been there. And it's been a pretty amazing time in my life. And I'll share some of those defining moments throughout the talk today. But I will say that it hasn't always been an upward path. Throughout the years, I've done a lot of side steps along the way. And those were really invaluable to my progression. And I'd suggest the wisdom that I've learned over the years. So that's kind of the career side. On the personal side, throughout that time at BMO, I also did my MBA part-time. I figured I should probably get up to speed on finance because I had no background in finance. So I did my MBA part-time over 4 years while I worked full-time. And had a couple babies in there too. So I've got 2 beautiful, powerful, fierce young girls, age 11 and 13, who keep me on the straight and narrow and keep me challenged every day. And so that's, I suggest, a really big part of who I am when I think about what wakes me up and what gets me out the door in the morning.
Thank you, Julie, for that introduction. And I've changed the slide because I thought it was important that we talk a little bit about, what do we mean by owning your power, and a little bit about why that would be important in terms of your leadership journey. So do you want to say a couple words about what that means to you and color it in a little bit in terms of the elements of owning your power?
Sure, other than the fact that my picture just changed to a cougar, so I'm not sure what that's about me. Yeah, owning your power, this is the year, I think, when we think about everything going on in the world. It's a really interesting time, and I'll apologize in advance for the cliche, but to me, it's about being the change you want to see in the world. And I think we often wait for things to happen. We wait for it in our own personal lives and careers, and we just think, keep your head down and good things will happen. And I think that's a mistake. And we're seeing it all around us at work and society. I think there's such an opportunity for us to just own it. Think about the just do it from the 80s. Well, how about we turn that into just own it, right? Just own it, get up, make the change, take the step, and be present every single day. And I think when we start to do that, we're going to show up a little bit differently. And I think it's especially important for women to really take up some space in the world where maybe we haven't been confident and comfortable enough doing in the past.
Well, and I love what you're saying, because it is about, going back to the credo of SHEO, it is about asking for what you need, standing up, having your voice be heard. And, the cougar being a powerful animal that sort of owns its space, takes what it needs. And this isn't about a scarcity conversation, though, that if I take more, there's less for you. It is an abundant conversation, and it's one of also generosity. And again, speaking to a value here at SHEO, the giving and the taking. And so the networks being developed are all important part of that. And it's about stepping up. So I love that already, as I said, some women have been putting their voice out saying, hey, I want to be a part of it. That's owning your power. And I think it's a perfect first step for us in this series, because that is, SHEO is empowering, but it's also about encouraging the voice of women to be powerful. And so all of that big bucket of meaning is sort of what we'll be unpacking with you today, Julie, and hearing more about your journey and the ebbs and flows of that for you, and maybe where you've tripped up a couple times and thought, maybe I overstepped the boundary here. And I think as women, we might question that a little bit more. Are we pushing the boundaries too much? Whereas our male colleagues may not think about that as much. And I'd be interested in your perspective on that as an executive inside of a bank. BMO does a great job of empowering women. However, there was a time where there might have been a few less women around you in that journey. So why don't we get into that, Julie, and start off with your first point and go in from here. So the first point, the first area for you to speak to is the importance and power of making declarations. We can create our own life, so don't leave it to luck. What did you mean by that first important takeaway for yourself as a leader, Julie?
Yeah, that's a big one that I would say is a relatively recent learning for me. In fact, I really realized it in my late 30s when I realized things weren't happening at the pace that I wanted them to happen. And I needed to change the way I approached things. And when I think back to that time, there were two very important declarations that I'd made. And I use that language very deliberately, because when you say the word declare, there's something really powerful about that word and what you put out to the universe. And I'm not a woo-woo kind of person, by the way. I'm very much of a, like, let's get this party started and let's take real meaningful action. And what I realized after many years in the company, I kept coming in second for executive roles that I was vying for. And after it happened 2 or 3 times, I kind of shook my head thinking, what the heck's going on? And I realized I hadn't declared to myself or to others that I actually wanted to become an executive at BMO. I kind of said it under my breath, and I think people knew that that's what I wanted, and I was ambitious. I wanted to continue to move up the organization, but I hadn't really said it with conviction. And so my first declaration from a career perspective was to declare that I wanted to become a BMO executive, and I wanted to get it done by a certain period of time. And I had declared that I wanted to become an executive before I turned 40. Kind of a random thought, but it was something that I could sink my teeth into. And it was only a few years away from when I made that declaration. And I will say that once I declared that out loud, and I declared it to my friends, I declared it to my family, and I declared it to my company in a way that said, what's it going to take? And what do I need to do? And how can I be very disciplined about getting there? Not just waiting for it to happen. And that's part of we create our own life. We don't leave it to luck, because up until that moment, I just thought, I'm going to do really good work. I'm going to keep my head down. It will get noticed. The company knows me. I've been here for a long time. They're going to tap me on the shoulder when the time is right. Yeah. Well, that doesn't happen. Yeah. I will say, and I've seen it time and time again, that when we keep our head down, and women, we do this, right? We just think, I'm just going to do good work, and they're going to tap me on the shoulder. And I will say, it is very rare. I could count on probably one finger, let alone one hand, the number of women I've seen that happen to. Yeah. So being very declarative. And by the way, it happened as soon as I declared it and said it out loud, and with conviction and confidence. Yeah. I became an executive within 18 months. Like it happened. Yeah. So that was the first, I'd say, declaration. The other piece where it was incredibly meaningful for me and where I learned a lot about what makes me tick is on the personal side. And so this goes back to your comment earlier, Marisha, about being an athlete. And I had been a runner for about 15 years, and I had done about 7 or 8 half marathons. And I'd seen a lot of friends I'd started running with starting to run marathons and do great. I'd be at the finish line cheering them on. And I always thought, one day I'm going to do a marathon, but I did not have the courage to actually do one. And I knew that. It was in my head, and I just thought, you know what? I just don't know if I can actually do it. And it was a moment in my life, for the first time in my life, that I actually thought, I don't think I want to do it because I don't want to fail. I was afraid that I wouldn't make it across the finish line. Right. And it was a really interesting realization. And I will never forget a conversation I had with a buddy of mine who said, look, all you want to do is finish a marathon, right? I said, yes. He said, can you walk it? Can you walk for like 5 hours? I said, of course I can walk 5 hours. And he said, then just do it. Yeah. And so at that point I realized, okay, get past this whole failure thing and this confidence thing that was eating me up. And by the way, for those who know me know that lack of confidence is not an issue for me, but somehow this was really, really holding me back. So anyway, I decided I'm going to declare it. I'm going to put it out there. Another goal, I want to do a marathon before I turn 40. And I put it out there about when I was about 36, 37. And finally I turned 39. I went, oh crap, this is the year I got to do it, because I put it out into the universe and I told people I'm going to do it. So then going back to the same fundamentals that I applied on the career side, I started enrolling people in my journey. And I made them part of it so that they can support me and help me through it. And that made all the world of difference. I told my coworkers, I told my friends, coworkers would say, hang on a second, don't you have a training run today? Get out of the office, go home and run. And I tell you, that was probably one of the most life-changing moments in my life, because when I did run across that finish line, I felt that I could do anything. And I went on to run a couple more marathons. And when I think there's things that I can't do, I remember that moment. And it gives you the courage to take on so much more. And I think we'll talk a little bit about this a little bit later on, Marisha, when we talk about failure and confidence, and how to build that muscle. I would say that, that declaring and going for it and taking some risks along the way will help build that confidence and that courage over time, and will enable you to overcome some barriers that maybe you're seeing that others aren't seeing.
Julie, how did you have that epiphany that you didn't want to fail? Like you kept saying, going to the marathon, seeing your friends crossing the line, but how did you actually dig deep and go, yeah, you know what? I actually just think I've got a fear of failure here. Do you remember how that came to be?
That's a great question. I honestly don't know. And that's why it was such a weird conversation when I talked to this friend of mine who said, look, can you run it?
Yeah.
It was such a strange thing.
Yeah.
And I have, by the way, I have failed before. Yeah. I have failed many times before.
Yeah.
In fact, I think back when I was in student politics in university, and I'd actually run for president in my high school, and I lost.
No.
And then I ran for president in university, and I lost. And I ran a third time and I won. Yeah. And so perseverance and, the fear of losing and all those things that happen. Yeah. For some reason, it's never seemed to have gotten in my way before, but this one, because I think it was physical and I felt that maybe it's not completely in my control. I don't know. It's a really interesting question. But once I wrapped my head around it and actually talked it out, I realized, of course I could do this. Yeah. Right. So I think it's talking it out. And when you enroll others, they can help you get there too.
Yeah. So there's two things. I actually have a question from Jane in Bristol I want to just post to you. But before I do that also, there's an important piece here around the declaration and saying things out loud. And if you keep talking about something, you want to have a community of people around you who call you out on it. So if you surround yourself with, if you surround yourself with people who go, yeah, there's just Julie again doing a talk, as opposed to, hey, Julie, keep talking about this. Like, come on, girl. And so, I think another piece of this puzzle is, your community, and that you allow people to hold you to account. I mean, Julie, you've been my client and you let me do that to you, which is a rather unique relationship. So that is something that often people don't allow others to actually call them out or hold them to account. And it's a big piece of growth. So having said that, though, Jane from Bristol asked this question. Julie, can you define what failure means?
Well, from my perspective, failure is not accomplishing the goal you set out to do. Mm-hmm. I think is probably the easiest definition. I mean, it seemed really black and white on a marathon, right? Which is you either cross the finish line or you don't.
Right.
And that to me was failure, but there was something else in there. And by the way, there's probably hours of therapy that I need to really try to uncover what the heck was going on in my head with that. Yeah. And so it's a great question. I think we all have our own definition of failure.
Yes.
And what it means to us. And once you declare, and this is why the combination of failure and declarations are I think, a really nice match, right? Yeah. Because when you declare and you put it out loud that you want to accomplish something by a certain point in time, doing it in a certain way, you kind of define the box. And if you achieve it, you achieve it. If you don't, you fail. Now, that's perhaps a very black and white. And I'm sure there's a whole lot of gray in that, but it's something to be very much aware of, I think, along the way.
Well, it's interesting because even just by Jane asking that question, define the failure, if we actually spent more time defining what we think failure is, we actually may realize, hey, that's actually really not what failure is. So the sheer exercise of defining it may help us even overcome it.
Yes, absolutely.
So, great question, Jane. I am going to move to the next one. And Sandra Lester, I got your question. And I'm just going to adjust this one with you, Julie, because it's interesting from Sandra. She said, what if you declare something, enroll people, and change your mind? It seems like crying wolf or like you lack integrity. Just comments on that, Julie?
Yeah, well, you'll notice I only declared 2 things, right? Like I've done a lot in my life. And there's not a lot that I've openly put out and declared.
Yeah.
So I agree with you. I think, you know, you don't want to declare what you're going to have for lunch tomorrow, right? Like you want to be really clear on what's important to you and what's a big deal for you. And everybody's going to have different degrees of what they need to declare, right? So my recommendation is, you know, declare that one thing. It's almost like a New Year's resolution, right? Like, what are you going to put yourself, what are you going to challenge yourself to do? What are you going to declare, and how are you going to work towards it? And so make it meaningful. And then I think it'll become a little bit clearer. Like for me, those were the two things that I declared. And for me, it was what I was going to do, by when, and what would happen if I didn't do it. Right. Like, so what was I actually going to do about it?
Yeah.
And so if you keep it at that high enough level, I don't think you'll be perceived as crying wolf. Now, can you back out of it? Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right. And so you shouldn't feel any shame of doing that.
Yes.
But if you really want something, declare it and get it is kind of my point.
And going for it, you're going to learn you may actually not have wanted it as much as you thought, and that there's actually another pathway to getting what you really truly want. So it's about getting out there in the world and going for it. Like you said,
you got it.
Right, Julie? Okay, good. Let's move to your second point here, which is the community piece, networking and collaboration. It's not once and done. A human-centered approach to nurturing and growing your network. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, you know, I get asked all the time about networking, and I go to a lot of events where, you know, they're called networking events, right? Which basically means bring a stack of business cards and go to town.
Yeah. Who's been there before? SHIO Network, I.
Yeah, and by the way, everybody's uncomfortable. Everybody in the room. So I actually like it when we call an event a networking event, because it's very, again, declarative. Here's what it's going to be. It's going to be a room full of people who actually want to meet other people. And so what's key for me around networking is to shift the mindset around networking and really think about it as uncovering new and interesting relationships that you can tap into over the course of your life, career, events, projects, whatever you've declared is important to you. And so when I think about networking with a purpose, if I go to a networking event, my objective is to come out of it with one relationship that I wish to deepen. It's not about accumulating how many business cards from that event. Now, don't get me wrong, you will come home with a whole bunch of business cards, and then you look at them, pick one that you're going to email or call and invite out for coffee to get them know them a little bit more. And that's always served me well. And the key with networking is to turn it into really collaboration and nurturing the relationship. So it's not just about that one connection, it's how do you actually build a network over time? And if you're in a large company like the one that I'm in, it's really easy to do when you're interacting with new people through different groups, through networks, and the risk of bumping into them again is very high. And so in cases like that, I would say do it on purpose. Find a way to meet every few months, grab a coffee, and over time you will have developed a whole network. When you're starting out, tips I give to new people in the company is I say, every time you meet somebody, ask them to introduce you to one other person who you think you might have a connection with. And by the way, it could be a connection with work, or it could be connection same stage of life. It could be, hey, you're into running. I know somebody else who likes to run. Maybe I'll connect you guys. And slowly but surely, you're going to move into building relationships. And the reason why it's about building and nurturing those relationships, it's that a network only comes to life when you can actually tap into that network over time. And I will say that the best way to do it in a way that feels authentic and great is find a way to give before you ask to take something from them.
Yeah.
And in fact, it's truly the SHIO model, right? It's really about radical generosity. So when you meet somebody, ask how you can help them. How can I serve you? What can I help you with? Who can I connect you with? And all of a sudden, you're opening yourself up to say, I care, I want to help you. And you need to be genuine about this, by the way. If it's not genuine, don't do it. But I think it goes a long way. And I'm naturally a very curious person, and I love meeting new people and learning about new people. So it may come a little bit more naturally to me in the moment. But I will say that you will get rejected more times before you actually make those early connections. And that's part of, practicing and trying some things on. And I mean, I think this happened to me even within the last year. I was at a function, because people say, okay, how do you go to a networking session, right? And people say, don't go with anybody, because otherwise you just hang out in the corner with that other person. There's also rules of don't bring your phone or your BlackBerry, because your instinct when you're uncomfortable is pull out your device, right? So here I was following the rules, didn't know anybody in the room. And I looked around the room and I assessed, and I thought, well, I don't want to go to a group of 2 because they're probably together and friends and it's going to feel awkward. Mm-hmm. So I went to this group of about 5 women all in a circle, and I kind of wedged my way in. No word of a lie. I did not get acknowledged for what felt like a lifetime. It was probably 30 seconds, but I just sort of stood there feeling totally embarrassed, and thought, okay, they're in their own little W, right? They're having their conversation. They probably all know each other. They probably shouldn't be at a networking event, but that's okay. So I kind of slid my way out of that circle and moved on to another group. So it happens, right?
Yes.
It happens, and it's okay.
Yeah.
And so the best you can do is show up in a way that you're there to help, and you're there to give. Yes. And then the rest will come. It's not unlike what I said about declaring, right? Put yourself out there. And when you do it, good things happen. And I've met some of my closest friends are people I've met through either, a networking event, or through work projects that I nurtured and developed a relationship with outside of that work event.
Yeah. Well, Golnaz was saying, summing up a little bit about what you were saying, and she said, moving from transactional to authentic transformational relationships. And
brilliant.
Nice way to sum it up, right? Yeah. The authenticity of it, like being authentic, and that's an important part of it. You just can't, back to the radical generosity, it can't just be what I need to get for me. It's about, giving.
Yes.
And at the same time, though, being clear, back to the first distinction about also what do you need to ask for and making requests, and what.
Yes. And that's important, right? I mean, being curious about asking really good questions, and it's questions that can also help you. Like, what do I need to understand? What do I need to know? How can you help me navigate the system, right? When you think about navigating within a large corporation, right? We need help doing that. And I certainly attribute a lot of my moves in the company to people I've met along the way who've known me, or who've known about me, who I've met and spent time with, that when an opportunity popped up, they came and said, hey, I think you'd be really good for this. Or they're looking for somebody and they'll tap me and say, hey, do you know somebody who might be good for this? And I tap into my network of people who I've developed relationships with to then pass that on. So it matters. It matters, right? And it's not just about, meeting somebody new. It's about being strategic also.
So Jill, you have a lot of confidence now in that area. We have a question from Anna Hutchison, who I believe is a Canadian in the UK. And she asked the question about practicing radical generosity early in one's career. So if you can think way back, not too far way back, but way back, to those earlier days when you were beginning in the bank or in other areas, how were you? And I think this is like embedded. You were born radical generosity. So can you distinguish how that started to emerge for you earlier in your career, or how that may have looked in those early days, or maybe just some advice that you might give looking around and seeing people who are beginning their career and what might be missing and how they could be more radically generous and may not realize they have that capability?
That's a great question. I don't know if I can think that far back. But I think it goes back to the comment when you're describing my bio and talking about being an entrepreneur. So I have a bit of a girl crush on all entrepreneurs. I think it's an amazing thing that you all do. And I get to practice it within corporate culture. And so I think I've always done that. Early on in my career, I would look for things that I could help grow the business and therefore grow others, with kind of pet projects. I've always done that since my first days in a branch back in Ottawa as a teller. When I saw an opportunity, I tried to solve it and fix it. Yeah. And so that's where I did it, was more at, I think, a corporate level than individually. And, other than just wanting to make connections, and, spending time with people, learning from others, and then finding ways that I can help them back. You know, I started running in my early 20s, and anytime I could recruit a new runner, I just loved it. I wanted to help them and help them accomplish their goals, which is why it was even weirder that I wouldn't do a marathon, because God knows I introduced so many runners that went on to do marathons long before I did. But just finding ways to help and to coach people along the way. I've always really enjoyed doing that, and look for opportunities to do that anytime I can.
Yeah, very good. Good, thank you. I just want to comment, Sarah Canny, I hope I said your last name correctly. The question you asked is going to be answered in our May webinar. So I'm going to put in little teasers as you're asking questions, just to make sure you all come back. So that one will be answered in May. One other final question in this segment, Julie. And actually, you know what? I'm going to, Yvonne Silver, I think your question is going to be answered in this next segment, but if it's not, I will ensure it gets asked. So your confidence is a function of your willingness to get out of your comfort zone. Approaches to building your confidence, second, my chat's in the way, your confidence muscle, a muscle, yay, one of our topics, favorite topics, right? Julie, building muscle. And then the old hint, do things that scare you. Talk a little bit to that, Julie.
Yeah, that's my go-to, you know, do things that scare you. Because the times I've grown in my career have been doing things where I was uncomfortable. And I mean, really uncomfortable. And I'll give you a couple examples of that. You know, I think many of us believe that we need to be 100% competent before we raise our hand for that next job. We've read it, it's in the literature, it's fact-based, right? Women are always holding ourselves back.
Yeah.
Well, I must have some more masculine tendencies in me, because my rule of thumb is 50%. And so I like being competent enough that I'll have some credibility coming in with some capabilities at the table, but also have those butterflies in my stomach thinking, can I really do this?
Yeah.
And I have to say, in all my times in the company, there is no time where I felt I made the wrong decision. And I mean, I went into managing a mutual fund call center, not knowing anything about mutual funds, understanding everything about call centers, because I came from that world, and leading teams, but nothing about the business that I was supporting. And you're learning, right? And so I think that's the part that that people don't realize is our incredible capacity to learn, and to learn quickly, especially when we're excited and passionate about something. And so when you do things that scare you, and you hear about it in public speaking a lot too, people say, oh, I don't like public speaking, I'm not good at it. And that's where I say, then get up on stage and do it, right? You've got to do it. You've got to practice. And I had the amazing privilege to support a president and CEO at BMO for a couple of years. And he's probably one of the best speakers to this day in the company. He just had a way to just enroll you in what he was talking about in such an authentic, natural, and genuine way. And people said, wow, he's such a great speaker. He's the most nervous person every time he goes on stage, and he was uncomfortable. And I saw that firsthand and realized, there's my role model, right? He's doing it. It scares him. The more he does it, the better he's at it. And he's exercising that muscle. And so doing things that scare you are what's going to help you grow and develop. And there's no doubt in my mind that that's the best source of advice I could ever give anybody, is don't wait for things to be perfect. Be willing to fail. So back to that failure word. And key for me in failure is fail small and fail fast. And it's just like, and this is where thinking about failure and muscles in the same way might help create a visual for people. If you work out, if you've ever lifted weights, you don't start by, deadlifting 100 pounds.
Hopefully not.
Hopefully not, or you will really hurt yourself. And you may not recover. So you start by smaller increments, right? If you're gonna do an arm curl, you're gonna start with 10 pounds. You're not gonna start with 20 or 30. So start with those smaller weights, right? There's smaller failures. And then if you hurt yourself, right, and you fail or it doesn't work, you'll be sore for a couple of days, but you'll get over it. And then you'll try bigger failures, and then you'll understand, you'll learn from them, and then you'll be able to continue to grow and take on greater failures. It is something bar no other thing that I've ever done is when I have actually failed and learned from it. And that's the key to this. Don't just fail and walk away. It's fail and learn, and know that you're going to live another day. And the more you do that, the more you'll be willing to take risks, do things that scare you, and know that you're going to come out stronger on the other side.
Well, and Julie, you know, the analogy of weights, doing a workout and getting sore, I mean, it's just inherently built into the psychology and the knowing of an athlete that to get stronger, there's going to be some pain. You know, not pain that's searing that kills you, but no pain, no gain is actually the truth. And yet, to translate that into business, if we're feeling pain, we may pull back as opposed to maybe this is my growth cycle. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
And so, I mean, this is why I love pulling analogy from sport, because what are your versions, SHEO women, of where you create some discomfort, some soreness in your life that at the end of it produces growth. And it may not be that you get to the result you declared for yourself right away, but if you keep that as your target, that soreness and that pushing towards it will get you there. And don't back down, because you experience that, right, Julie?
Yeah, exactly right. And by the way, it's way more fun.
Yeah.
Right? Like if, you know, like the only time that I went into a role, as an example, from a career perspective, when I went into a role where I knew I could do the job with my eyes closed, I was bored silly, and I didn't perform at the level that I typically perform. Now, luckily, it was in between babies. And so it was the 9-month gig. I knew I was getting out of it. Yeah. But I will tell you, it is not fun. And when you're not having fun, you're not excelling. You got to love what you do, and to be passionate about something. I find learning really gets you a long way down that path. Yeah. And to stretch yourself, right? Because it just feels good at the end of the day, where you feel like you've actually pushed yourself, pushed others, challenged, learned, and continue to grow.
One question before we move on to your fourth point. How you mentioned early off about, you know, you judge your capabilities. It's like a 50-50 rule that you've got. But how do you judge your own capabilities? How do you know you're at that 50 percentile that now you can go for it?
Oh, that's a good one. I think it's a gut check, Marisha. Like I think
okay.
Where I've been lucky is that because I've moved sideways a lot in my career, I've moved in different lines of businesses where I knew I had like leadership capabilities, people management capabilities, some process capabilities. Like I had that core, like general management, call it, that I knew that I was good at that. And so I could kind of lift and shift into another line of business where I may not know the line of business at all. And it's an important part of the role. And this is the nervousness, right? Because you're leading a whole bunch of experts. Like when I remember going into the mutual fund call center, and everybody they had more degrees than a thermometer, right? These guys had like everything. They knew everything about everything. Yeah. And now I knew how to lead them, but I didn't know about, you know, the product details and how to make things, like how to actually sell the product to a customer, for instance, right? So that was the part that kind of gives you the, you know, this part is feeling a little bit uncomfortable, but I know I could learn it. Yeah. Right. Like we have to have confidence in our abilities to learn. Yeah. And it's the same thing when I think about when I did a stint in business banking, that I was so nervous about it because for so many years, it felt it was a very male dominated part of the company, as is wealth management. And I just thought, you know, maybe that's not a place for me. I don't have a finance background. I don't know, you know, all this. I don't know this world at all. People have far more experience and depth of knowledge. They're all older than I am. Like these are all things that go into your head, right? That says, why I can't do something. Yeah. And then I kind of came back to what I was good at and what I knew I could do and where I could get credibility. And the important part in situations like that, by the way, is to not pretend that you know it all. Yeah. And I think I did that in my early 20s, by the way, because I was kind of over promoted very quickly. And I kind of thought, you know, I knew everything. That's why I was in these jobs. I find as we get older, we realize how little we know. We know less as we have wisdom. Yeah. And so I've been very declarative in my last few jobs that here's what I bring. And by the way, here's what I don't know and what I'm really looking forward to learning from all of you. Yeah. And so you kind of put it out there saying, look, I'm not going to try to defraud you and tell you that I know everything. Nobody knows everything. Yeah. And so I can help you by bringing the best of me to you, and you can help me by doing the same thing. And we as a team are going to get to where we need to go. Yeah. And I think when you do that, you create a very different leadership environment where people, including yourself, can really thrive. Yeah. And remember, the topic of this learning lab is owning your power. And so you keep owning your power, and it has different dimensions to it, different colors, different scenarios, but it's
on and like a moment by moment owning your power. It's just sort of embedded and caked into you now, Julie. And owning your power is also acknowledging where you have gaps, because if you can't acknowledge where you have gaps, you're never going to be able to continue to build that influence.
Yeah, exactly right.
Great. Let's go to our fourth point here. Feedback fuels your growth. Approach feedback as an opportunity. That's a nice build.
Yeah, it is. Speaking of gaps.
Speaking of gaps.
Yeah, feedback is something I think we fear. And I am a self-declared feedback junkie. I love feedback. I love it from my boss. I love it from my colleagues. I love it from my direct reports. I love a 360 feedback. In fact, when I don't get it is when I get worried. Because if I'm not getting it, it means people either don't care or I'm doing something really bad. So I'm always asking and looking for feedback. And by the way, I don't just say, hey, how am I doing?
Yeah.
I say, what could I have done differently?
Good question. Yeah. How you ask the question, right?
Big difference. It's not about like fueling my ego, right? It's not about tell me how great I am, right? It's what's the one thing I could have done differently in this meeting?
Yes.
Or what is it about our business that where I have a blind spot that I'm missing something, right? Like go for the kill and go for that bit of feedback. Now, that's one way of doing it when you're totally in control.
Yeah.
The part that I think we have the hardest time with is when we receive feedback that we don't agree with. And I will tell you that it's probably the most important piece of feedback that you can actually reel in and do something about.
Yeah.
And I'm talking about that feedback where you think, oh, but that's not what I meant to say, or that wasn't my intention, or that's not what I wanted you to think, right? It's that intention versus perception.
Yeah.
That is the most dangerous kind if you don't do anything about it, because it is what other people are seeing and feeling and believing in what you're doing. You may have only heard it from one person, but assume that everyone else is thinking it. And that's the hardest one to take, because we instinctively go on the defense, right? I got to defend. That's not why, that's not this, that's not that, versus pausing and acknowledging it and actually doing something different. And to do that, you do need to enroll others, right? Back to enrolling others around you. Like, we are very tribal as women. We need our tribe. And so this is a great opportunity to tap into somebody, male or female, on something that you're working on, to say, look, I got this feedback. I'm really worried about it. And so I want you to pick out those moments when it happens. And I'm going to check in with you a lot, because I really want to get at it. And I want to make sure I don't keep doing it, because clearly there's something I'm doing that's not landing well. And it's not going to come by me very successfully. And when I think back, I feel really passionate about this, because I have received feedback twice in my career that was really critical feedback that I received from senior leaders, two completely different moments, but feedback that was so important that I honestly thought it was going to sewer my career and that I was going to have to look for another job. Like, I thought, that's it. This person thinks this of me. It's not at all my intention. That's not what I was trying to do. And yet I am done. And it was a really difficult moment for me to think, how am I going to rebuild and do things a little bit differently so I can rebuild my brand? It really felt like my brand had been deteriorated. And so it took some time and effort, but I did go back to that person once I got over it. It took some time for me to get over it. And I said, here's what I heard, here's what I'm working on. And with your permission, I'd like to check in with you once a month to get some feedback on whether I'm doing what I set out to do. So you've got to be deliberate, right? And that's maybe another example of declaring that what you're working on, and being very, very deliberate about it. But feedback, it is the best way to ask questions of the people who you work with or who you live with. I mean, asking feedback from your kids or from your spouse can go a long way too. And just be really deliberate about it and be prepared for it. Take it in and do something about it.
Julie, we're getting a lot of comments on this, and I think what some people or some of our community are sort of trying to discern is this distinction of being confident, asking for feedback, and not needing feedback to be able to then be confident of ourselves. And I know I may not say this first name correctly. Is it Aof Swan? And maybe you could put the enunciation in the webinar chat of how I would say that correctly.
Aoife.
Oh, Well, there you go. You know, Julie, then. Okay, yes, that's where this question, we shouldn't need feedback to be confident of ourselves. And I don't think you're saying that, but say a little bit more about how it actually isn't actually the same thing. We're not seeking feedback to justify ourselves or to feel better, to feed our ego.
Oh God, no.
Right? Or to affirm anything, right? It's a completely different gym that we're working out in.
Well, actually, I'd say they're connected, but I connect them differently. I'd say it takes a lot of confidence to ask for feedback.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Yeah. Good point. Good point.
Right. And so, and by the way, we need a lot of positives to offset some of that constructive feedback too. In fact, research tells us that we need 4 times the amount of positive feedback to the 1 bit of constructive. Right. So it's not to say don't look for the positive feedback, like get some positive feedback too. Otherwise, you're going to tear yourself down and apart and you're going to think you're doing nothing right.
Yes.
So that's important. And it does take confidence to ask for constructive feedback. And if you're not prepared to do it just yet, think about the type of question you're going to ask that's going to give you what you need.
Yeah.
Maybe don't be so bold up front, right? It's back to that, small muscles first, right? Kind of tweak it. If when you hear feedback, you need 3 bottles of wine and a couch of therapy, then don't do it, right? Do 1 bit at a time. And as you build that confidence and and by the way, when you take in feedback, you do something about it and you get secondary feedback saying that it's getting better, that will build your confidence.
Yeah.
Right. And so, but the two are interconnected in different ways.
Yeah.
But I mean, feedback will help you grow, will help you own your power, back to your comment, Marisha, that is so important.
Yes.
And help just keep you on the path that you want to be on. Yeah.
And the other point about this is the diversity of feedback you might gather, because you want to be able to go to different places, because, whether there be a specific lens that people see you and know you as versus other people, that feedback could just help you see that your message is getting lost, that your intention is not being delivered, right?
You got it.
In what you're doing. So we have to also really seek that diversity out, especially if you tend to be in communities that look a lot like you or sound like you. And so getting out of those communities to garner feedback to know whether you're really on the right track in terms of achieving what you are set out to achieve.
Yeah. And people, by the way, as you enroll others, enroll people that you trust, of course. Mm-hmm. But when I've enrolled direct reports, people who report to me, they have felt very committed, right? They feel like they're there to really help you, and they take it very seriously, and it's empowering. I think it's empowering to them and to you. Yeah. And so, you can kind of kill a bunch of different birds with one stone on this one.
Okay. Or feed a number of different birds with one seed. How about that?
I don't mean
All right. Number 5, let's move on. Build your personal brand from the inside out. Values are the context for your brand. Over to you on that one. What a nice build again.
Yeah. So all this kind of wraps into a nice bow with your personal brand.
Mm-hmm.
And, when I think about my own brand, it's taken a long time to kind of take shape over time. And I did an exercise several years ago. It was a personal brand exercise that I thought was really good, which was, ask 5 people what they think your brand is. Like, what are you known for?
Yeah. What do you know for? Yeah.
Yeah. Which was fascinating for me. And it made for a really interesting moment of reflection. And it's easy. Like, it doesn't have to be complex. It's just, hey, when you think of Julie Barker-Merz, what comes to mind, or what's one word, right? And you kind of string all those together, and it starts to take shape. And what I learned through that exercise was it connected so closely to the things that I feel very passionate about and what's really important to me. And when I think about personal brand, I kind of tie it into your own personal passion. Because if you do the things that other people want you to do, that's exactly what it's going to look and sound like, right? If you do something you're passionate about that gets you up in the morning, you're going to excel, and you're going to put yourself out there in ways that maybe you wouldn't otherwise, right? And so to actually be really excited about something and passionate about something, actually, it's actually a currency, I think, in the world that we live in. Right. So for me, personal brand, I'd say start with what your values are and what's important to you. Ask people around you what you're known for, and then build your brand. And then declare it, right? So we kind of tie back into the declaration. Like for me, my brand is that I'm a catalyst for change. It's very broad. It's kind of all encompassing. And it's something that I realize I've done in my career and that I try to do outside of work is to help make change happen through others, for others, whatever that looks like. And it ties into my entrepreneurial spirit within the company. And it also is grounded in the things I'm really most passionate about. And so when I spend a little bit more time thinking about what gets me up, and if I weren't paid to do my job, what would I do all day and all night? I think about gender diversity and gender equity. And having two young girls, I think helps bring me there. And also being a woman in business, and for a very long time, being the only woman at the table, is kind of fuels what's important to me and what I'm passionate about and what will carry through into my brand. And so when I think about the brand I want to have both internally to the company and externally, I think about a catalyst for change for all things women and girls. Yeah. And then once you've declared that and you understand what that is and what makes you excited, then you can start tapping into those things that will help tell that story so that you can continue to develop and grow in those things that are important to you, and that you're not all over the place on things that, you know, you're going somewhere because your boss says you got to go there, or you've got friends who are doing this and, oh, I don't know what else to do, so I'll just go and do this, right? So think about what's really important to you and then go after it and make things happen. Yeah. And I think that helps, you know, again, just grow and develop and nurture, and it waters, you know, the plant, waters the seed of your brand as you do more things to help develop it over time.
Yeah. So, and it's, you know, to actually define your values, we often do that in a company or an organizational setting, but to do it for yourself is very important too, which is why I think this is such a powerful point, because you always want to go back to your values that drive you.
Yeah. And it also helps you make those career decisions along the way.
Yes.
I will say in terms of things that excite me, and this is why perhaps I've always gone into that 50% mode, right? Because I want to go in and I want to change things. Yeah. Right. I have never gone into a role where everything was all tickety-boo and perfect, because I know that, like, I'm not an operator. Yeah. I want to go in and I want to turn things upside down, and I want to help take us to a new level. Yeah. And so once you understand that, and that's me personally, by the way, it won't be for you or other people on the phone, on the WebEx today. But once you understand what that is, it helps make those decisions along the way really easy.
Yeah. Well, and you keep talking, Julie, which I think is so important, about, you know, passion and what lights you up and what gets you out of bed in the morning. And that is a really powerful place to stand and to have that defined for yourself, and knowing how it gets translated in all the different areas of your life. And you've just kept creating opportunities at BMO that allow you to fuel your passion. And that is owning your power 100%.
You got it.
You know, you're in a large company, and to do that might even be harder than me as an entrepreneur at times, but you just keep on enrolling people and taking that power in a way that really, you know, converts. So it's a great place. That's great. I'm going to move on to your final point here, and number 6, in terms of being passionate and limitless. If it doesn't exist, build it. A little bit what we just were talking about. So let's finish off your 6 takeaways with this point, Julie. Say more about this one.
Yeah. So this, I mean, I can't help but think of Vicky and CEO and everything that this means. So it's kind of a nice one to close on, I think, because when you're truly passionate about something, you don't see the barriers in your way. And it goes back to what I talked about in terms of my personal brand as well. And when I believe in something, I don't wait for the systems and processes to catch up, right? Sometimes you have to put yourself out there. Now, in many ways, you have to earn the right to do that. And so I wouldn't suggest, if I were, you know, my first year, second year in the company, that I would have had the courage to do some things that I've done in the last, you know, call it the last 5 years. I think you earn, you know, credibility over time that you can tap into when you need it. And one thing that has never really got caught in the way for me, even though I'm working for a chartered bank that is full of rules and regulations, is if I feel really passionate about something, I will stand up for it and I will go for it. And as long as the company continues to help nourish that with me, I will stay here. And the company's been phenomenal in that way, in enabling me to do those things, right? So there are some things that I've that I've done over time. CEO is, I think, a great example of that I was incredibly passionate about what this was about and why Vicky was on this path to do this, that it was like she had me at hello and I was going to do everything I could to make it happen.
Right.
Had I stopped at the first no, we wouldn't be here today.
Yeah.
And I mean, life is like sales. If you've seen any of the old sales movies like Glengarry Glen Ross or any of these movies where, you're going door to door selling, selling whatever it is for a set of steak knives, you need to get a lot of no's, right? You're going to get 9 no's for your 1 yes.
Yeah.
And so knowing that is look for the no's, look for people that get in your way. And each one of them is an opportunity to clear one out and to move closer to that yes.
Yeah.
And when you're truly passionate about something, when you're willing to declare something, right, then you'll be able to get there.
Yeah.
And the world is your oyster. There's nothing that can get in our way. And I do truly believe that. Knowing what that is and having that vision like Vicky's had for CEO to kind of take us to that next place is a real talent that not many of us have.
Yeah.
And so keep your ears and eyes open. And when you get excited about something, how can you lock arms with somebody else and help take them to that next place?
Yes.
So it doesn't have to be something you come up with, because we don't always get there.
Yeah.
Right. Sometimes, we think, gosh, I want to be the next Vicky Saunders and I want to come up with this amazing model and just go for it.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's just keeping our ears and our blinders, our ears open, our blinders off, and paying attention to what's happening around us. And when you get excited about it, just do it. Yeah. Right. Go back to the beginning of just own it, make it happen, own your power, and don't let anything stand in your way.
Yeah. The building blocks. And, this idea of disruptors, we talk a lot, Clayton Christensen's term about disruption. And I think that probably if we were to talk about disruptors, women sometimes are viewed negatively when they become disruptors, but men are cheered on, celebrated. And, that's what men do. And I think this is an area where we're really stepping up as women and saying, no, this is our space. And maybe we do it with a little tidier than some of our male colleagues, but this is a place for us to be in also. And, we look at Vicky's work, obviously, and then all of our venture companies and the many women who are sending us on the web chat or sharing examples of things they're doing, which are all highly courageous and clearly a reflection of their passion. So
yeah. And a question popped up. I've been seeing some of them pop up. I can't see them all, but a question came up that I'd love to tap into a little bit, which is how do you do it, right? How do you build it?
Yeah.
And my best advice is that you can't do it alone. And CEO is a great example of that, right? It's about the power of everyone coming together.
Yeah.
And when things have been important to me, I don't try to go at it alone. That's when I failed, by the way. It's who can I enroll in this to help me get there? Who are those influencers within the company that if I spend one-on-one with each of these people, I can kind of they can rally around the cause. And I think, they may have their own set of networks or people that they can then tap into. So how do you think about those key players, the chess players that you can line up so that you can win? And that's so critically important. And it's not just about your friends, by the way. It's typically finding the people that you aren't friends with as well, because it's that other voice that you need to hear to make sure that, okay, what could possibly get in the way of this happening? So you got to go to the person who you think is going to stand in your way. Yeah. And if you can enroll those people along the way, you can build it.
That's a really important point, because one of the things, again, back to sport analogy, if you look at a tennis player, it looks like they're the only one out in the court. But the truth is, to become great, there is a huge network, from their trainers to their parents, to all the people along the way, to their communities, to everything that it takes to be able to rally around that one tennis player and to be, truly successful. So I think that's a really important point, Julie, around building community. And that's why we now have the Learning Lab, which is extending our community and having these kind of conversations. So Julie, let's move on to our next conversation. Now we've got these 6 takeaways from you and some of your favorites. So we've got a favorite quote, a favorite book from you, and then maybe a woman who's really inspiring you these days. So over to you. Here's your quote. Why did you choose this quote, Julie?
Because this is on my wall in my kitchen.
Oh, there we go.
Because my girls gave this to me on Mother's Day last year. And it just, I think, nails it. And I love it. And so I look at it every day. And I just love it because it's just, you know, when you get up, like just go for it, like make things happen. So it's just an amazing quote. I love, and I don't know who came up with it, by the way. It's one of those, you know, those blocks that you buy in those gift shops.
Yes.
Well, the girls went out and got it, wrapped it up, brought it home. And I just, well, you can imagine my reaction. Yeah, I just right on the money. And so, so that's one. I mean, I have many, of course, great quotes that I love to read. You know, every now and again, you know, a quote will pop up, but this one I think kind of says it all.
Great. What's your book you're reading now, or a book that you want to share with the community that you think would be in keeping?
Yeah, so I hate to say it's not a business book. I know a lot of people are like, okay, what's the latest business book? I'm really into fiction right now and really enjoying it. And the books in particular are any book that has a female heroine. I seem to be really caught up in strong female role models. And it kind of happened by accident on referrals that I got from friends on books before going on vacation. So a couple that I thought I'd pass on, they're just, you know, really fun, light reading, but inspiring at the same time, would be The Alice Network by Kate Quinn about women spies during the war. All the Light We Cannot See by Anthony Dewar. The Boston Girl by Anita Diamond. And another fun one, because I also love to cook, is Yum and Yummer by Greta Podlowski, who is the Looney Spoons author. Yeah. Which is also fun. So when you asked me that question, Marisha, I was thinking, okay, well, so I went home and I looked at what I had lying around, and that's what I have lying around right now. That's what I do. Yeah. And they're great, really interesting books.
Yeah, very good. And is there one woman who's, I'm sure there are many, but one woman you're sort of looking to now for a little extra inspiration at this point in time in our history?
You know, I thought long and hard about this one, and there isn't any. There's no one woman. And I really say this, you know, in earnest, that I wish there was one that I can hold up. I seem to get really excited about just being surrounded by many women. And so, you know, when we go back to that earlier slide that you had, Marisha, with the cougar, you know, on her own or his own, it's a rare sight. Like, I find just being surrounded by amazing women, and anytime I can be in a room full of women, it kind of fills my bucket. So I'm deeply inspired by women in STEM right now. I think there's a real need to get more girls and women in science, technology, engineering, arts and math. So I should say STEAM. So that's an area that I'm digging a little bit into, and I plan on doing some reading on some of the early pioneers of women in engineering and science in particular. I think is interesting. Probably my girls are asking questions about that now too. And I like to take them down that path. And again, without sounding too cliche, my girls inspire me every day for their boundless energy and what they think they can do. So it's a good time to be a woman.
Yeah, fantastic. Julie, I'm going to ask you, like, for a minute or two, for you just to share the next leg of your journey, your leadership journey, and your journey of owning your power. What do you see sort of as your next leg of this journey?
I haven't figured it out, and I'm sure I speak for many of you listening today that we don't always have it all figured out. And I have to say, those declarations I made in my 30s, I haven't quite figured out what they were in my 40s. Yeah. And as I get closer to 50, I'm going to figure out, what do I do before I turn 50, and think a little bit about that. But it's, you know, I'm really focused right now on being a mom and being the best possible role model to girls who are about to become teenagers. And that's an area that I've been spending a lot of time just thinking about, reflecting, and wanting to be there for them in the way that I show up at work, by the way. So when I say that I want to be a great mom, it's about what they can be proud of how I show up at work every day, and what's important to say that this is how we do things. Yeah. And this is how we live the lives that we live. And so I'm hoping to stay in this role for another few years. I love the team that I work with. I think there's a lot that I can still accomplish here. So career-wise, I'm still thinking about what's next. Yeah. It's not in the short term. And I'm still thinking about when I'm going to declare next. I don't know quite yet what I have in me, and I'm still thinking through that right now.
Got it. It's great. Well, I think your comments about role modeling for young women and for girls is a big part of all of our journeys, and the opportunity to do that, because it is important that we see ourselves reflected when we're out there. And I think that's something that we're really embracing, whether it be, women or women of color, and that we make sure that our voice gets heard and that young girls and girls can see us. I remember as a little girl, I loved hockey, but when I was playing hockey, it was just a different world. There was no Olympic team. There was no place for women in Olympic sport. And I know you've been on the Women's Hockey Federation, a member there, board member. And that's I think that's a really important part. And it may not be as intentional or as declared, but it's just embedded, I think, in how you operate. So that's a good one. Julie, I'm just going to take a moment and remind people that I'm hoping that you have been taking your insights and ideas down from what this conversation has been. I've seen a lot coming on the chat, which has been fantastic. And I want to make sure that by the time we end off in the next 5 minutes, that you have thought about or even put some initial thoughts together on your key actions to take. Another area on this canvas you'll see at the bottom is what could stop you from taking these key actions. So if you recall earlier in our webinar on this learning lab, Julie was talking about, she really identified for herself that real fear of failure she had in running a marathon. It wasn't because she didn't want to do it. It wasn't because she thinks she couldn't do it. It's just this fear of failure. So if you can just identify what might stop you, then you can start to identify what you need to ask for in this community or in other communities to help support you. And going through this exercise, I promise you will make a difference. You'll also notice in your 2 key action items to take, it's a buy-when day, setting a buy-when for yourself. And Julie mentioned that a lot during this learning lab, setting timelines for herself. But then it's the who else needs to be involved. Who else could support you? And just thinking through a little bit of that, and who can help you fulfill that action that you've declared for yourself. And you can take this on to your Slack channel, move this forward, and be able to support each other as we go from here. So that's what I'd like you to make sure that you are taking away from this, is you've got those insights and actions covered. And I'm going to now transition this as we've got 3 minutes left. But before I do that, there was something I'm just going to go back to one question. It was from Kelsey in Oakland, and it was way back, Kelsey, that you asked this question. But I'm just going to pose this last question to you, Julie, from our Californian attendee. And she said, what do you do if you feel like someone might just be giving you feedback, Julie, along your journey, and you're out there owning your power, and you feel like that person is actually just trying to cut you off at the knees or to, put out your light? Have you had that experience? And if you have, or even if you haven't, any thoughts on that in terms of what you do with that kind of feedback or that kind of interaction?
That takes me back to a very specific circumstance where somebody who was very well regarded in the company, who was quite a bit my senior and who I just joined the leadership table with, who came at me a little bit. So I did something in a meeting, which was kind of in typical Julie style, right? I said what I meant, and I was very candid in sharing my thoughts on something and feedback. And after the meeting, she came up to me and in a very condescending way said, we don't do that at this table. Right? So I'd been promoted to this table, and she said, that's not how we do things. Let me tell you how we do things. And she kind of, gave me the end to end on it. And it was a very jarring moment for me. And it kind of went against my core and my own personal values, right? Because it was basically saying, don't speak up, don't give feedback, like don't do that in the moment. It's not good, because you're gonna, create all this tension around the table, and that's not how we operate. And so that was the only moment where I kind of took that feedback with a grain of salt and thought, okay, well, that's what you think. I didn't say this to you, of course. Yeah. But I just thought, that's what you think, and this is who I am. And if I can't show up as my authentic self, then it's not on, right? It's just not going to work.
Yep.
Now, Having said that,
Mm.
I kind of took it to an extreme, right? In my head, I thought, I don't care what you think. I'm going to keep doing what I always do.
Mm.
And that was a mistake. So I think staying true to my values and my core was really important. And so to continue to say things out loud was going to be really important for me in my own, everyday life. But I did need to consider that feedback and think about the way I was sharing information around the table. Maybe there's a different way of doing things. And it took me a while to figure that out, but I did eventually figure that out and I got there. And it was important also that I keep her on my side, because what I learned over time was that you need to care about what people say when you're out of the room. And she was doing a really good job talking about me outside of the room, and it was impacting my brand. And that's how it all kind of came back full circle for me to go, okay, this actually matters. And I got to think about, how do I do it? And how do I test the limits of my values? I still play within them, but I got to push a little bit harder, and I still need to play within that corporate environment that makes the world spin, right? And so it takes a little bit of thinking through it, but all that to say, all feedback's important feedback. You can choose the degree to which you adapt, I think, is the part that you want to take away from it.
Yes, fantastic. That was great. And I'm glad I brought that question back, even though I saw it sort of go by the webinar chat, and I wanted to make sure that we squeeze it in. I think that was a really good summary about the ebb and flow of this conversation. So to take this forward, everybody, join our Slack channel. I have seen so many of you sharing great resources, like Lee Tracy Stockberger shared this great book. Thanks for the feedback. So you want to get more of that, get on the Slack channel and meet everybody from this community and keep this conversation going. You also have an amazing community of talented women inside the SHEO community. So you might be looking for something, go look for it inside of our community. It probably exists, or ask for it. And finally, if you want to join me a little bit further and more of this kind of work, www.entrepreneursvelocity.com is where I'm putting some energy these days, and I'd love to see you there. And I want to just finalize this first learning lab with letting you know about our second one, which is speaking with confidence. There's that word again, confidence. Speaking with confidence anywhere, anytime, with any audience. And it's with our fellow activator, Stacey Berry, from the B Stellar Consulting Group. And Stacey and I have been talking a lot about this one, and I think it's going to be another good one, building off the shoulders of how you kicked us off so wonderfully, Julie. Stacey is a top 100 Black woman to watch in Canada. She's been declared as such. And one thing that struck me about Stacey is the many different areas that she's working inside of the Greater Toronto Area and beyond, and the many different people she connects with to gain inspiration. And like yourself, Julie, wants to be a role model to young women and girls, and specifically women of color. And that is something I am so excited to explore with Stacey on our next Learning Lab, which will be May 23rd, 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific. And we have made some adjustments so that we're also going to get our New Zealand group and anyone in Australia a little bit more into our time zone. And getting everybody around the world up at the same time isn't possible, but we're doing our best here at SHEO. So with that, everyone, I just want to thank you for attending and remind you to please give us your feedback. Right? Give us your feedback. We want your feedback, all of it. And give us your ideas, how we did today, and how we can take this forward to keep building out and making everybody a force to be reckoned with. Thank you for your time, Julie. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Always to be with you. And we will be sharing all the feedback. Thanks. And have a good rest of the day to all of you. Bye-bye.